In a dark cave, a young guy sat in shock and repeated that what happened to him would be the end of him. His hands clutched his blood-red forearm, and his thoughts revolved around death, because he did not know whether he would go to hell or heaven. He was sitting on a flat stone, and in front of him was a virtual neon yellow sign offering to see the end of this world, while the guy himself was still thinking about hell and heaven, and about what the creatures in hell think about heaven. The sign with the inscription that he must see the end of this world continued to hang motionless in the air in front of his face. The guy looked down from her, and then back, continuing to wonder what he would see, and whether he would see the end. He leaned back exhausted on the stone, closing his eyes from fatigue and falling into memories. His name was Kyle, and they asked him about Becca, who was his sister, and someone's adult voice advised them to rest since the drive home was far away, while Kyle himself sat in the back seat of the car and carefully held his little sister's head. The bright light of an oncoming car suddenly illuminated the entire interior of their car. Kyle came to his senses in the same cave, on a flat stone, realizing that it was several years ago, because when he woke up, he was already in this cave, and there was some kind of book nearby in the violet light. The book was called Heavenly Harmony of Pure Art, and that was the only thing Kyle got here. He took this book because it was the last clue to return home, and in it was the only message that said that he needed to see the end of this world, and Kyle did not know if he would be able to return to his family if he followed this instruction. When his strength and endurance were running low, a new neon sign announced that he had completed training. Tired and exhausted, Kyle was surprised by this news. All this time he remained in the cave, tormented by gloomy thoughts. Therefore, the bright light of freedom struck him, because he could not believe that everything was over and he would be able to see his parents and sister Becca. Going to the light, Kyle left the cave, and immediately fell to his knees in disappointment. He was not at home, he was not in his home world, and the place outside the cave turned out to be another martial arts world called Mirim. Kyle hit the ground with his fists in disappointment and anger, because he hoped that after leaving the cave he would get home, but he found himself only at the beginning of another, long journey. The guy could not understand why someone unfamiliar would do this to him, because he had been in the cave for at least 10 years. Kyle stared into the void in front of him, thinking about what he needed to do to see the end of the world. Suddenly a stranger called out to him, saying that he had a nice outfit, and that Kyle was making so much noise that the man heard him. The man said that he wouldn't have done anything to Kayla just like that, but his family was now starving. The stranger was in a bit of static, looked shabby and looked like a robber, pointing a sword and threatening the question of whether the guy would become their food. Kyle was shocked by this situation, because he still had not recovered from leaving the cave. The bloody sword fell to the ground with a dull sound. Kyle backed away from the dead stranger, whose body lay lifeless on the ground. He was sure that he was not guilty, not understanding why everything turned out this way, and a lot of thoughts about the fact that this was the first time he had killed a person, that it was the only way out, and he had no choice, like what he could not do something else, with doubts that anyone would do this, and he didn't know what to do, because the stranger had attacked him, and Kyle wasn't sure that this was not a dream, and whether he had really become a killer. A neon yellow sign suddenly appeared in front of him, informing him that Kyle's external level had increased. The guy hesitantly stood up, stopping near the corpse and thinking that apparently he really killed someone, and this led to an increase in his level. The first nervous chuckles escaped his mouth as he came to his senses. Nervous tension was released through laughter, and it became easier to accept the surrounding reality, because this message allowed him to intuitively understand what needed to be done. That book, Heavenly Harmony of Pure Art, taught him everything, and the levels that were written about there, increasing with each kill, they should help Kyle return to his original world, which means he needs to reach the maximum level. Therefore, in the present time, Kyle has turned into an invincible warrior, inviting the enemy to demonstrate his skills in the next battle. He threatened the head of the demonic sect with a sword while his assistants tried to somehow change the losing situation. Now in this world, Kyle was called the Immortal Sword Emperor, and he couldn't remember which sect leader was in front of him. The leader of the demonic sect claimed that he was also the Immortal Sword Emperor, but Kyle looked at his clothes and realized that he was the 8th head of the sect. The guy began to count on his fingers how many previous leaders of this sect had died at his hands, and it turned out that there were already 6. Kyle said out loud with a carefree smile that the guys from this sect were strange, because he met them every 10 years. However, His carelessness was deceptive, because in just a moment he was able to summon his sword and his magical power, which illuminated his face with blue light. 1 second was enough for Kyle to cut off the head of another leader of the demonic sect with one blow of his sword, and the guy himself reported that, in general, he had fun meeting them again. The same sect acolyte who had tried to help his leader in the beginning jumped at Kyle again with his sword, shouting that he would avenge his master by killing the demon-like bastard he thought Kyle was. Kyle easily dodged the blow, asking whether the novice was serious and whether he was also a member of the demonic sect. The guy easily caught the stranger's face in his palm, because he had unlimited strength. Using his magic, which flooded everything around with blue light, Kyle said that he liked the fighting spirit of this novice. He could not object, since due to Kyle's magic his body stopped obeying its owner. But Kyle didn't stop there, as his magic created an entire wall that divided the world around them into 2 parts with a large border. And behind this wall, the novice saw not that simple smiling guy Kyle, but an otherworldly demon with a frightening face, surrounded by blood. After only a moment, Kyle let the boy go, telling him that such a fighting spirit was normal for his age, and that he should learn something new and come to Kyle again. He added that if he returned, it could cheer him up. Leaving the novice alone in the gorge among the corpses, Kyle admonished him that he should become the next head of the sect. In the evening, the guy threw his sword aside in disappointment, upset that the head of the sect he had killed during the day was a dummy. He leaned against a tree, wondering out loud what he could do to entertain his life now. Throwing his hands behind his head, he indulged in thoughts that perhaps he should create a new sect himself, much stronger than the one he defeated today, and not understanding why everything had become so boring. Tiredly opening his eyes and looking at the sky, he thought about the time he spent in this world. In the light of the full moon, he said out loud that a whole 140 years had passed since he got here. 140 years since it all began, since that car ride, the accident, and the fact that he was ready to see the end of this world for the sake of his family. But now he couldn't even remember their faces. If heaven did not exist for him, then this world became hell, and life became hellish day after day. Only Kyle was not going to indulge in thoughts and sad thoughts about the past for a long time, because he remained alive in this strange world. Suddenly his peace was disturbed by a new yellow board with new information. The first tablet said that his external and internal levels were equal to 50, and these were the maximum to achieve, and therefore he was congratulated on this achievement. The second sign announced that Kyle had fulfilled the unlocking conditions, and in particular, the last level heavenly emergence had been unlocked. But the most unexpected thing was the last sign, which announced that Kyle would be returned to Earth. The guy had no words to express his emotions, except for the question of whether the return would happen right now. New bursts of hysterical laughter were his first reaction, after which he admitted that he had already given up, which means that having received such permission to return, he must look pathetic. But the next thought made him come to his senses and fill him with anger and madness, because such a proposal could be an attempt to insult him. Kyle reached the maximum level, and having released his power, he asked the void if he could be considered a god, although it was a strange question on his part. He also believed that to become a god he must abandon all worldly desires. But remembering his family, his emotions always ran high, and he tried to understand if he had ever felt this way in his life. Seeing a sign asking if he wanted to return to the original world, Kyle understood that his family had probably already died, because many years had passed, and he only wanted to return home because of them. But now he only wanted one thing: find the creature that brought him to this point, and take revenge on him. A huge desire for revenge and death for the one who was to blame for Kyle being here filled the guy. It didn't matter to him who was involved or where he was. Kyle swore that he would definitely kill the person responsible for his presence in an alien world. All the guy's strength fell to the ground in one big avalanche. It was such a powerful release of magical energy that it could be seen from a great distance around. After all, the immortal Sword Emperor Kyle was finally ready to leave this world. He stayed in the world for 140 years, raising his level and developing his abilities, so that in an instant he could turn into a simple stream of information and be transported back to Earth, to his home world. On the day of Kyle's car accident with his parents in 2011, another event occurred. The blonde girl, dressed in the robes of a goddess and also accompanied by movement disturbances, knew more about this day than Kyle. After all, on that day a portal opened, and this day was supposed to bring horror that would threaten everyone very soon, and the goddess will do everything possible to ensure that humanity develops to withstand future threats, to withstand the horror that open portals filled with many red eyes will entail, red eyes of huge monsters, because the goddess believes that people should not waste the blessing in vain. At this time, somewhere in another corner of the parallel world, someone's triumphant voice was heard in the silence. The chained man was glad that someone else's journey had finally begun, because he had waited so long for what happened, and he knew Kyle. In the real world it was already 2025, and in Korea, in the dungeon of the Red Wolf, a girl used magic to shoot from a bow. She shot at the huge red mutant wolves that were chasing the guy in the wasteland. The wolves were huge, had 4 eyes and huge fangs and were intent on killing anyone in their path. But then the girl fired another arrow filled with blue glowing power using her archer skill power arrow, and instead of defeating one wolf, the arrow filled with a spell struck many of the creatures chasing the boy at once, allowing him to survive. The girl masterfully used her skills to deal with monsters, and it was Kyle's sister, Becca, the leader of one of the groups of people fighting monsters. She jumped from the hill to her rescued comrade, saying that it was not too late and they could get out. While the rescued guy praised her skills, the guy was so distracted, forgetting about safety, and a huge wolf attacked him from behind, fatally biting him. Becca turned around at the cry, amazed that there were more wolves. The rescued man fell to the ground, quickly losing strength and life. The girl could only watch as a huge pack of red wolves killed every person in her group before her eyes. She realistically assessed the situation, realizing that there were too many monsters and they were not going to go anywhere. While her mana was slowly running out. She, too, could die if everything continues at the same pace, but then she saw someone who, as soon as she ran out into the clearing, immediately turned around and rushed into the forest. This was a young guy who clearly had no intention of helping his teammates, and was going to save himself. Becca screamed his name, calling him Gray, hoping that he would come to his senses, but her attempts were in vain, but she attracted the attention of the wolves, who immediately began to approach her. The girl tried to cast magic on the arrow, but her mana spread too slowly to be used quickly, and the situation was approaching a catastrophic failure point. Gray, meanwhile, with hysterical thoughts, ran away from the clearing as best he could, realizing that he was too reckless. Seeing his teammates being overtaken by wolves, he mentally called them insects, thinking that he should not have been part of their group, and if he lingered, he would suffer the same pitiful fate. He saw a portal ahead, hoping that he could escape as he had to. Becca was still able to fill her bow with power and released an arrow engulfed in blue flames. She stuck into the ground right in front of Gray's feet, not allowing him to run further. The girl immediately found herself behind him, turning to the disoriented guy. She was completely engulfed in a blue flame of anger, calling Gray a damn dog and asking where he was going. The guy tried to look surprised, saying that he was glad that she, their leader, survived, and addressed her as Madam, while he began to make excuses that she misunderstood the situation, and they should all calm down. Becca, not listening to his chatter, simply grabbed the guy by the collar of his clothes. She was angry and repeated that she had already told Gray that the battlefield was dangerous. Becca was very angry, blaming Gray for being a weak coward who ran away in the face of danger, and their entire team died because of him. Gray just clenched his teeth in anger, openly saying that this is so, but he is not going to die here. At the same time, the guy pushed Becky's hand holding him away, asking what if he's a coward, because he doesn't have to sacrifice his life. Becca, not too shocked by his confession, laughed, saying that he was right. Turning away and getting ready to leave him alone, she told herself that she shouldn't have expected more from Gray, because the guy was trash, and now he should have returned to his father so that he could console the winner and pat him on the head. Only now she doubted whether such a handsome father could turn a blind eye to his son's escape, and offered to see what would happen to the Dawn organization, of which his father was the head. Becky's blackmail worked, causing Gray to become very angry. The girl was about to go in the other direction when the guy called out to her. Gray was not going to let her go so easily, because now she could ruin his reputation with her knowledge of his meanness. He activated the Rock Breaker fighter skill, concentrating his mana into red power to strike. The charge of magic hit Becca, who was not expecting this, right in the chest. The force of his attack was so great that it threw her several meters away, causing her to drop her bow. With a cry of pain, Becca flew to a distant tree, hitting the trunk hard. Gray froze next to him, enjoying his victory over his defeated opponent. The angry guy grabbed her by the hair, angrily calling her names and pressuring her that no one needed her, because she didn't even have relatives. Approaching her face, the smug Gray mocked the girl, saying that although she was strong and famous, she could not even imagine what would happen to her in his hands. The embittered coward was going to denigrate her by glorifying her, but in a bad way with the help of his words. He intended to tell everyone that the leader Becca was the one who failed everyone and led to their death, and as a result of the raid into the dungeons, her entire group died due to her fault. Gray again concentrated the mana in his fist, confirming with the girl that his story was quite plausible. Becca did not have enough strength and energy to respond to the traitor. Gray raised his hand to strike her, so that with the last words that leader Becca did a good job, he could finish her off. Lightning bolts of blue magic illuminated everything around with a loud roar and split the skies, striking the ground behind the shocked Gray, distracting him and preventing him from finishing off Becca. In the swirl of dust and wind, a familiar dark silhouette appeared at the sight of the blue energy lightning strike. It was Kyle, finally transported to his home world. The guy looked exactly the same as he had in Mirim, with long hair, loose clothes and no trace of the age he had spent there. The 2 signs in front of his eyes announced that he had reached the maximum outer and inner levels of 50th, and that he had returned to Earth. Kyle slowly realized what had happened, beginning to rejoice that he was finally back. He began to laugh hysterically again, thinking that returning to Earth was a reward for reaching the maximum level. It was not serious, as if everything that happened to him was some kind of joke. But despite such a joyful event, Kyle did not forget about his desire to kill the one responsible for his disappearance. His desire for revenge was as strong as when he first thought about it. Gray, not understanding who was in front of him, called Kyle sick and said that he was talking to himself. Gray was uncomfortable with the fact that someone suddenly appeared from the thunder and screamed murder, and if the stranger could teleport, he must have been a magician. The traitor brazenly tried to address Kyle, ordering him to tell him where they were now. But Kyle ignored him, simply walking past him like he was an unimportant bug. Gray was starting to get angry that the stranger was ignoring him, while Kyle noticed the girl was unconscious. Kyle clarified whether Gray had a duel to the death with her, since she was dying. Gray didn't like this, since now there was one more extra witness. As Kyle bent over the girl, the traitor realized his mistake. Gray realized that he had made the wrong choice again, because the stranger could see what happened to Becca, which means he couldn't just let him go, and it would be better to get rid of him. The traitor tried to understand what the stranger was doing, but he was too afraid that he would understand what happened or find out the truth, so he again activated his power, saturating his fist with red magic, and he did not care what the stranger did, since he should have simply been eliminated, as another obstacle. Gray called out to the stranger, but Kyle was busy examining the girl in front of him, including experiencing shock, as he recognized her necklace. Kyle gently touched the girl's cheek, peering into her exhausted face. During this time, Gray lied that he and Becca were enjoying a duel to the death, and pretended to lie that he wanted the gods to return the girl. Only the traitor did not experience these feelings, but only distracted the stranger with conversation in order to reduce the distance. After all, he had already concentrated enough power to attack Kyle from behind, shouting that he would follow the girl to his death. Kyle's blue magical power gathered around him at that very second. Strong and energetic streams of blue magic stopped Gray. Kyle had too much control over the power that was now around them, blocking them from the outside world and suppressing everything around them, and the stranger's aura was frightening and deadly. Gray did not expect such strength from a nondescript opponent. Kyle was too powerful and angry, and his unbridled power swirled the air around the guy hovering above the ground. Gray could only watch everything around him in fear and amazement. Kyle, using his full power so that even his eyes glowed blue, asked if Gray knew who he was. Concentrating his forces into stable blue lightning, Kyle called Gray a youth, ordering him to say his name, but Gray didn't know him, so Kyle introduced himself, saying that he was the Immortal Sword Emperor. He said his name Kyle, and his strength was so great that his eyes glowed with blue energy. The angry magician loomed over the frightened guy, telling him that even if he called his name, it would not help him. From the finger that Kyle touched the traitor's forehead, a small ball of bright neon blue light was released. It was a charge of energy, which in the next moment destroyed everything in its path with a large and powerful beam, burning through space many meters ahead, sparing neither stones nor trees. And from the outside it was clear that the energy explosion generated by the small ball had reached colossal proportions, leaving its mark for many meters around. When the energy of the blow was exhausted, only a charred place remained from Gray's head, as well as behind it along the trajectory of the blow. It was very easy for Kyle to remember his name, because he was in his home world. He stood behind the still unconscious girl, coming to his senses. Turning around in blood and with a half-crazed smile, Kyle told her, addressing Becca by name, that her older brother had returned. Becca remembered her childhood on that fateful day in 2011, when her parents, not for the first time, told the upset girl that it was time for them to leave and they could not stay where she wanted, and if Becca really wanted, she could stay in alone. Her parents went to the car, saying that it was already getting dark, and she should still go with them. Only her brother, Kyle, remained nearby, asking if she really liked the amusement park that much. He smiled because he was worried about her, advising that if Becca still decided to stay in the park, then their parents could have big problems. Becca didn't want to agree with him, only hugging the bear closer to her. She wanted to stay at the amusement park, not because it was good, but because if she went home, she didn't know when she would see her brother next, since her mother said that Kyle wouldn't come to them that often, because then school began. Kyle touched his sister's hair, calling her name to get her attention. He asked if Becca knew how much Kyle loved her, and then followed up by saying that even after school, he would come and visit her. Becca listened with tears in her eyes to these words, and to the fact that Kyle suggested that next time they also go for a walk to this park to spend time together. She would never refuse Kyle, so she immediately collected herself and answered with consent and a bright smile. Therefore, when Kai again asked if everything was okay and if she was ready to go home, Becca agreed and asked her brother to carry her to the car on his back to enjoy these moments fully, and Kyle replied that at least this time he would carry her. Every time he won't be able to do that, because Becca is heavy, which caused his sister to feign indignation, and she asked him to carry her every day. These were the last bright moments of her memories before the car accident that happened on the highway that same day. Becca blamed herself for the accident, thinking that everything happened because of her stubbornness and desire to take a walk in the park, because their parents died in that accident. And when Becca came to her senses in the wrecked car and called for her brother, she received no answer. The place where Kyle sat and had his seatbelt on was empty because her brother had disappeared. In the real world, not the girl's memories, Kyle used his power to heal her. Becca came to her senses with a scream, opening her eyes and taking a deep breath. She immediately tried to get up, but was in pain, while Kyle told her that he had healed her with spiritual power, but since the wound was deep, she would not be able to move painlessly right away. The girl looked at the guy with distrust and without a grain of recognition, asking who he was, to which Kyle replied with a short pause that he thought she recognized him. The guy pulled his hand towards her pendant, which she immediately grabbed and covered with her hand, while the stranger told her that he was happy to see her again, and that he had grown so much and had become much heavier since their last meeting. But this didn't stop Kyle, and he took Becca's hand with a smile, saying that he had probably changed too. Becca was shocked at how much the stranger reminded her of him, her older brother from the bright memories of the past, and the day of that terrible accident. After all, it was Kyle who gave her that pendant with a photo of their family, and said that even if he wasn't there, she should never give up and should always be strong. Becca swallowed her words, realizing who was standing in front of her. She began to cry with happiness, because her brother was such an idiot, suddenly disappeared, and now appeared. Kyle hugged his sobbing sister, holding her soothingly to him, saying that he understood how hard it was for her. But Becca came to her senses, pushing her brother away with a sharp movement and taking a fighting stance, as she remembered that Gray was supposed to be somewhere nearby. Kyle turned serenely towards the crater where the body lay, asking if his sister was talking about this guy who tried to kill her. Becca was shocked to see both the crater and the corpse inside it. The body showed no signs of life and did not move. Becca asked Kyle why he killed Gray, and her brother, confirming the traitor's death, asked what was wrong with this situation. The girl abruptly grabbed his hand, pulling him in her direction. She said in fear that they needed to escape from here as soon as possible. Becca lived in one of the high-rise buildings in an ordinary city, in their previous apartment, while the girl sat on the sofa, Her brother looked around, making sure that over the past years the house had remained in the same condition as it was. Becca, meanwhile, was pondering the situation, telling her brother that they were in for a big problem, as Director Khan was due to arrive soon. Kyle didn't know who it was. He asked his sister, and she explained that this was the director of the Dawn Guild, and also Gray's father, and since he was a local mafia, he was known for his cruelty and ferocity. Director Kong was one of the 11 high-ranking hunters in Korea. Becca looked at her watch, noticing that it had been a long time since she was unconscious, and most likely Director Khan had already been informed of her son's death. She said out loud that she was the only one who survived that raid, and that means she would definitely be suspected of something. Kyle couldn't understand why this could cause so much trouble. The guy, with slight arrogance, clarified, since this brings so many problems, why isn't it easier for him and his sister to simply get rid of this group by killing their leader? Becca immediately brought Kyle down from heaven to earth, pulling him by the cheeks in a family-like manner, and not allowing him to pompously say that he was the immortal Sword Emperor. Although the girl agreed that her brother's words made sense, she noticed that Mr. Kong had a level above 50, and also a rather high position. And then Becca flared up, screaming at her brother for calling himself the immortal Sword Emperor, indignantly. Who even says that? What does it mean? And if her brother has been gone for 14 years, and now he's saying something like that, is that all? It's good with him. Kyle was only surprised that she said it so directly, while the girl complained that she did not know what to do, because neither her father and mother nor brother were nearby, and asked if Kyle understood how much it was hard. She continued speaking, stopping at the fact that Kyle had appeared so unexpectedly when the guy himself froze in front of their family portrait. He upsetly clarified that her words meant that her parents had already died. Kyle, with some confusion, asked his sister if he had said something strange or maybe his tone was too rude, while the girl tried to understand what he meant. Reluctantly, the guy explained that he was in a place called Mirim, but the reason why he was there was not important for the conversation. Kyle turned to his sister, asking her to tell him everything that happened while he was gone. He was interested in who the hunters were, what kind of guilds appeared, and whether in this world there was the concept of level that she mentioned. Becca stopped him, asking him to wait, since everything was complicated enough to explain everything, and her head was threatening to explode from so many events. She stood up, preparing to leave, saying goodbye that she would tell everything later, since she had one urgent matter and she needed to go away. Kyle asked where she was going, and Becca, showing her car keys, said that she would go to Dawn, asking Kyle to stay here and not do anything. Kyle walked away, opening the door and deciding to wait for her in his old room, where everything was left untouched, as if he had been in it yesterday. The guy remembered his sister's indignant reaction to his words, realizing that he had traveled alone for a long time and reached the top. And now he had to become an older brother again, and it was so long ago that he barely remembered anything. Kyle was determined, remembering what his sister had said, including about Mr. Khan, and the guy decided that he should find out more about him. And then the sounds of impacts shook the front door, disturbing Kyle's peace. Several strangers were near the apartment with bad intentions. One of them used a magical purple seal, channeling his power through it. He grinned bloodthirstily, clearly planning a crime. So these three, using the seal and purple power, broke down the door to Becky's house. Kyle saw them from the hallway, hearing the question of where his sister was. The girl's older brother guessed who the guys were who smashed the door to their family's house. It was the director of the group, Dawn Can, who was looking for Becca. At that time, the girl in her car reached the business center, where the second largest guild headquarters in Korea was located, the Dawn Guild. Becca was worried that she had simply walked away, leaving Kyle alone in the apartment. She hoped that Director Kong did not have time to do anything, and that he could grab her as soon as the girl entered the building. Wondering who to ask for help, Becca was standing by her car when another girl called her name. It was Alice Libor, deputy head of the Dawn Guild, who was asking Becca what she was doing here. Becca asked the girl where the head of their guild was, having learned from her that Mr. Khan had gone somewhere with the head of the raid, John. Alice asked the drooping Becky what had happened to her. Becca looked thoughtfully and decisively at the deputy head of the Dawn Guild, mentally reflecting on her position and status. Alice Libor was one of the 4 strongest hunters, and although everyone around her knew her strength, few understood it. Becca didn't think about it for long, because her situation was hopeless, and there was no one else to turn to for help. So she clenched her hands into fists tighter, preparing to tell the girl opposite the whole truth. At this time, 3 members of the Dawn Guild froze on the threshold of Becky and Kyle's house. Kyle was angry that the intruders had come without warning. He asked if the most impressive thug among those who came was that same Can, and whether his parents really didn't teach him to knock on doors and not break them, to which one of the guild mockingly clarified that maybe they should go out and then knock politely for him to open, indignant that they didn't come here for a housewarming party. Here, the same impudent guy asked Becky's brother who he was, and Can left the guy, pulling him back and forcing him to stop the squabble. The guild leader said that everything is not important, and he only cares about where Becca is now. Kyle was not going to make the situation easier for them by asking if they were really looking for Becca or the one who killed Gray. And if the latter, then it was he who killed Kong's son, which plunged the head of the guild into an angry shock. Mr. Kong screamed in frustration and anger as he released his strong red magical energy into the world around him. But this did not bother Kyle, and the guy said that since his title from Mirim sounds so strange in this world, then he should be called Mr. Kyle Benet, after the name of his family. And since everyone understood everything, then they can start, and activated your blue magical energy, concentrating it in your hands. The guy allowed Khan to start because he wanted to see his skills, and the man concentrated all his power into the hammer to deal heavy damage to the daring guy. They prepared for a clash, each using their accumulated energy, which for Khan was red and concentrated in a hammer that transformed into a sword, and for Kyle was blue and looked like lightning around his hand. Meanwhile, Alice, having heard from Becky the story of what happened during the raid, enthusiastically said that she wanted to see the girl's brother, and they should hurry. A fight began in the Benet house, and a sharp swing of red energy left a large noticeable mark in space. With his blow, Khan unleashed the full power of his power on Kyle, who was easily able to dodge the blow. The guy watched with interest that there were also mysterious forces in the Tao, and in this case they were similar to the spirit of the sword, or its energy. Only Kyle saw that the source of these powers was different. He wondered if this was the power of the hunters that his sister Becca spoke about. The guy remembered how at the moment when he returned to this world, Gray, who attacked him, used the same strange power. Kyle thought it was funny and unusual, and he told himself that it was worth studying. Mr. Ken, meanwhile, overwhelmed with anger and despair, was preparing for a new blow, concentrating all his power in the sword. He swung his sword left and right, galloping towards his opponent, and using his warrior skill called sequential attack. This allowed him to quickly and presumably unexpectedly approach Kyle. The guy just stood still and didn't move, not at all frightened by what was happening and not paying attention to the red flashes of magic. Khan hit him with a backhand with concentrated force, intending to cut him in half, but nothing happened. The red magical energy did not cause any harm to Kyle, slowly dissipating near him. The guy told Ken, embittered and amazed at the futility of his blow, that this was enough, and Kyle saw everything in order to understand what the director of the Dawn Guild was capable of with his amazing and incomprehensible power. It turned out that the guy managed to block all of Khan's powerful attacks with his bare hands, and they didn't even push him away. The guy was so strong. Kyle, with his blue eyes glowing from the magic he was using, ominously asked Mr. Ken whether there were really 10 people in Korea as strong as him. At this time, Mr. Ken's assistants became more active, planning to attack Kyle from both sides, while he blocked their boss's sword with his hand. They tried to unleash their blows on Kyle at the same time, but were met with a blue glow that countered their blows. The guy waved them away as if they were annoying flies, saying that they were just bothering him, when another of the henchmen prepared fire seals to attack Kyle. The guy only had time to feel the heat from the fire aimed at him. Several seals hit him directly in the back, exploding dangerously close in an attempt to damage and destroy him. Because the owner of these seals, one of the minions of the guild leader, used a magician's skill called fireballs. Director Kong and the others watched as the flames exploded right next to Kyle, and one of the henchmen exclaimed triumphantly that they had succeeded. Several more guild henchmen with swords attacked Kyle's figure blazing with magical fire, intending to pierce him through. Only now Becky's brother, still engulfed in magical orange flames, again stopped the blade aimed at him with his bare hands, in addition reporting that the attackers had exceeded all his expectations. True, with the next phrase he doubted his words in anger, also easily breaking the attacker's sword, as if it were made of plastic. The eyes of the guild minion opened in horror, because he did not expect this. Kyle activated his power again, which immediately engulfed his body in blue magical fire, dispelling the orange flames and throwing back the attackers. The minions could not understand why he was so strong and what he was doing. Kyle simply shook off his clothes, as if he was shaking off not the consequences of someone else's attack, but light dirt. He glanced briefly at the calendar, finding confirmation of his sister's words that he had been gone only 14 years, although he had been in Murim much longer. But now, when he assessed the abilities of the minions of the Dawn Guild who attacked him, he realized that their level was quite good, but the abilities were similar to innate talents that had been developed over 1,000 years. And looking at the head of the guild, Kyle did not understand how people were able to overtake Murim in 14 years. And such as the head of the guild and his minions could only be found a couple of people in each generation, which was absurd and did not fit in with reality. Kyle also remembered that he himself was a similar inconsistency, because in Murim he had a low cultivation level, but he was much stronger than many. Therefore, he was able to defeat a huge number of opponents when he fought in Murim. And the reason was that the hierarchy of Murim's power did not affect him, and the power of those around him was just words. Then he took advantage of the idea of rebuilding his abilities and rising to the very pinnacle of power. So Kyle defeated everyone in Murim who was at least a little interesting or dangerous to him. Alice and Becca hurried across the bridge to Benet's apartment. Becca herself, while driving the car, could not believe that the deputy head of a large guild wanted to see her brother. The girl glanced furtively at Alice, wondering why such an influential girl as Libor needed her unremarkable brother. Besides, the difficult question remained whether Alice was a friend or an enemy for them. Then, in the parking lot, Alice asked Becky for permission to meet with her brother, Kyle Bennett, promising that in return she would report the incident with Gray as an accident. Libor also promised that she would talk to the guild director, and Becca thought that this was an excellent and generous offer that she should not refuse. And now, when Becca takes Mrs. Libor to her home, she only thinks about whether Alice is her brother's enemy or not, and does not understand why the girl in her car is silent. As if reading her thoughts, Alice Libor took the words, reminding her that Becca had said that her brother, Kyle, had been missing, and asking how many years, to be exact, he had been missing. Becky's words, confirming her brother's absence, struck Alice with their timing, because Kyle disappeared in 2011 and had been missing for 14 years. It seems that Alice perfectly understood where Becky's brother was, since, like Kyle himself, she translated 14 years into 140 years, which actually passed in Murim, and Libor was even mentally afraid to imagine how strong the guy would be. Therefore, the deputy head of the Dawn Guild asked another question, asking Becca what kind of person her brother was, to which the girl hesitantly replied that he was sweet and kind, remembering his former self. Becca was pleased to talk about her brother, and she also noted that he was smart, and Alice asked if he studied, meaning higher educational institutions. Sister Kayla named the university where her brother studied, and remembered that he also helped her with her homework, and Alice was surprised by the name, because it was difficult to get there, noting that the girl's brother probably studied very well. Becca just grinned at this, reporting that he was just very persistent, explaining that once Kyle took on something, he did it to the end, and did not stop until he reached the end. At this time, in the Bennett family's apartment, Kyle pointed his finger at another henchman of the head of the Dawn Guild, standing a short distance away. Becca's brother, completely ignoring the fierce attacking swordsman from behind, asked the guy he pointed his finger at to use his strange aura again, because he had never encountered such power in Murim. Having repelled the swordsman's refusal from behind with one right hand, Kyle threateningly asked not to interfere with him, since he was not interested in this attacker. The guy Kyle pointed out earlier had no choice but to activate his blue circular rune diagrams, from which ice crystals immediately appeared, which he directed at the stranger. Kyle repelled them with a simple shield, so that not a single shard of ice reached the target, and the guy himself commented that he liked the coldness of the henchmen who attacked him, and in Murim this can only be found in the Ice Palace in the North Sea. Remembering the ice dragon, Kyle brought his hand to his face with the help of magic, causing fine frost to appear around his palm. A moment later, he turned this frost into huge ice dragons, which were summoned to attack the guild's minion who attacked him with ice crystals. The short-sighted Ice Lord was immediately frozen by the ice dragons, unable to withstand Kyle's strength. The henchman with the shield only managed to shout for help in an attempt to escape, but Kyle noticed his escape as soon as he turned towards the sound. It turns out that the henchman could not leave the apartment after colliding with the bluish magical barrier created by Kyle, and no blows of the fist or appeals to the leader could help him. A bright blue beam pierced the head of this henchman with a shield, killing him on the spot. Khan called out to the shield keeper who had fallen to the ground, while Kyle noticed that the warrior with the shield should stand in the vanguard and stop the enemy's attacks, and this one cowardly ran away, showing his back. Kyle found himself behind Guild Director Khan, announcing that it was his turn. With a grin, he clarified to the man that he did not expect this, and asked if everyone here was so cowardly. At this time, the man tried to feverishly figure out who was in front of him, and why such a young guy possessed both ice magic and protection, and could emit a strange beam from his fingers, not understanding what it was, and doubting whether it was magic, and not understanding how a mage can stop his attacks. Khan noticed that if he paid attention to the world around him, despite the large scale of their battle, absolutely nothing in the house was damaged. Wondering if this was an accident, Khan called Kyle a bastard, asking what he did magically to this place, and if he was preparing for their arrival. Kyle answered the man with a grin that he simply used the soul of his sword and covered the entire space around with it, because he had not been home for a very long time, and he could not allow the guild members to destroy everything around him. The guy remembered the past, realizing that he could not explain it in more detail, since it was difficult, but he explained that as soon as the intruders entered this house, they immediately found themselves in a world controlled by Kyle. The Dawn Guild president became angry at this response, activating his power again and preparing to attack Kyle, believing him to be a monster. The man did not intend to die in this place, so he gained enough strength to activate the Berserk skill. He used up most of the red magical power swirling around him and used his next skill called Fury. Kyle, as always, calmly watched what was happening, generally agreeing that for some he could be a monster, but the red flashes of someone else's magic did not frighten him at all, and he only thought out loud that the aura around Ken had increased, and so far Kyle didn't know what the man was going to do next. The guild master readied his magic-filled sword once again to attack Kyle in rage mode. He used the same technique, throwing a lot of hard and fast punches in an attempt to hit the guy, but Kyle had no problem dodging it, as if he could see all the movements in advance. Becca replied that this did not make Khan any better, but on the contrary, as if he had lost his mind and become crazier. Kyle directed his power into a sword lying on the floor, broken at the end, filling it with blue magical energy and lifting it from its place, calling to him. He no longer had any desire to stand on ceremony with the guild master who disturbed his peace, so he simply prepared for the blow, adding more of his strength to the sword. One precise swing of the blade was enough for Kyle to hit the man, fatally cutting his body. The guy himself simply passed his opponent without receiving a single scratch. All Khan had time to do was try to call Kyle a monster again, to which Becky's brother said that he should know his place. Turning around covered in blood, he noticed that Ken was simply nothing in front of the immortal sword emperor that was Kyle. Soon Becca brought Alice into her apartment, inviting her to come in and pass, but was surprised that the front door was open, looking inside in shock. Her brother was diligently wiping someone's blood off the floor, and nearby bodies were piled on top of each other, and in response to his sister's indignant question about what happened and why the front door was open, he only said that she was late. Wringing out the blood-stained rag, Kyle simply said that his sister shouldn't be surprised, because these were the guests he brought to their housewarming party. But Becca did not understand anything, indignantly clarifying what kind of housewarming party it was, and how it could turn into a bloodbath. The sister insisted that she had just arrived, and here it was, insisting that her brother explain himself, but Kyle only replied that he liked his sister's determined look, and in New Rhyme's world she would have become much stronger. Alice casually noticed that there seemed to be fun in this apartment, and Kyle only noticed her, mentally asking who she was. After all, he felt how the heavenly harmony of pure art resonated next to her. Alice, in turn, peered at Kyle, wondering who he really was. She looked at the guy smugly, mentally noting that apparently he thought that he was the only one who was in Nirim, and that it was a great surprise for him to meet someone who could be aware of the place where he had been missing for 14 years. On a sunny day, the world around the Bennett house was quiet and calm. Becca slept peacefully in her bed, undisturbed by anything. Suddenly the girl woke up, sweating from one frightening thought. She abruptly rose from the bed and headed deeper into the apartment to make sure that she was just having a nightmare. Stopping at the threshold of one of the rooms, she hesitantly called out to her brother, realizing that she could not find him. Standing in the rays of the morning sun, Kyle, already with a short haircut and in clothes familiar to this world, noted in surprise that Becca got up very early. The girl turned around, not expecting to find him at the window. Kyle smiled carefreely as he stood by the open window, with a little concern asking his sister if she thought he had disappeared again. Becca was glad that she wasn't imagining everything and that her brother was really next to her now, so she asked why he didn't sleep longer. The sound of an incoming message caused Kyle to break away, asking her sister to pause the conversation, and Becca agreed. Kyle read the text carefully, taking the message seriously. It was a message about an important call, and the guy went into another room to answer, leaving Becca alone. The girl from the window saw him leaving the house, worried that a week had passed since his return, and everything seemed unreal to her. That meeting between the deputy head of the Dawn Guild Alice Libor and Becky's brother passed without much result, because they didn't talk about anything, and the only thing Alice said then was the promise of a new meeting. It was also strange that after some time people from the Dawn Guild arrived and took the bodies of Director Can and his subordinates. A news report the next day informed the townspeople of Gray's death and Director Khan's resignation, and numerous news articles were filled with speculation about the motives behind Director Khan's abrupt choice. Alice Libor kept her promises and the Bennett family was not harmed. Becca, watching from the window as her brother talked to the driver of the car that had just arrived, remembered that she, as the only survivor of the Red Wolf's dungeon, was given a long vacation. The girl knew that at the time of the call, Alice Libor was talking with her brother and invited him to her place, so she wondered what the deputy head of the Dawn Guild wanted from Kyle. Looking at Kyle leaving, Becca quietly said that he should return unharmed after the meeting with Libor. Alice sat alone at a table in an authentic Chinese-style cafe. She was enjoying tea from a small light bowl when a guest disturbed her, stating that she had so nothing to do at the moment. It was Kyle, who had come at the girl's invitation, and clarified that their small family with Becca had been under 24-hour surveillance since the moment he met Libor, and wondered what could be interesting about that. Alice smiled innocently, pretending to be embarrassed that her surveillance had been discovered, and said that it was for the safety of their family. But Kyle, sitting down at the table opposite her, waved it off, saying that this situation could be left out. Kyle took a sip of tea from the bowl, immediately recognizing the variety. Libor was glad that the guy recognized the type of tea, which was called Chi-Shan's Silver Needle, and she shared that she often goes to this particular tea shop to taste this rare tea. Alice didn't intend to drag out the small talk for long, getting straight to the point and asking Kyle for a story about her arrival in Murim. Kyle replied with a smile that the meeting with Murim left him with bad memories and he didn't like it too much, so he invited the girl to be the first to tell about her experience. She put the bowl back in the saucer, saying that at the moment there were only 3 repatriates, those who returned from Murim, 2 of which were her and Kyle himself. The third person to return from Murim would be the head of the Twilight Guild, Max Paxwell. The Dusk Guild was as influential and strong as the Dawn Guild and had the same huge number of hunters, but at the moment both guilds had differences and did not get along with each other. At the same time, Elisa said that she and Maxim once compared their stories of being in Murim and found out something in common. They disappeared together in 2011 and both ended up in an unfamiliar cave. Each one had a mysterious treasure on one side called the Heavenly Harmony of Pure Art, which was a glitch book engulfed in purple magical fire, and on the other side of the cave there was an exit to a world called Murim. Alice reported that it was a similar experience between her and Max and asked if Kyle had the same experience. The guy remembered how, upon leaving the cave, 2 signs appeared in front of him, asking if he wanted to return to the original world. And if his desire to return is great, then he needs to see the end of this world. Kyle confirmed that in his case everything was the same, and Alice continued that they were able to return to the ordinary world only a few years later, and when they returned, here, in their home world, the era of hunters and dungeons began. And about Murim, in which they spent some time, she never found anything, noticing that the changes in their real world were connected specifically with Murim. Alice asked the guy if he knew when the conditions of the hunters and dungeons appeared, and Kyle replied that it was 14 years ago, after the revelation of the goddess. It was that girl in light robes who was worried about the fate of this world. Alice confirmed that this was true, and after the goddess's revelation, dungeons, monsters and hunters suddenly appeared, and with them classes and skills. Altogether it became very reminiscent of RPG games. The girl finished her story, asking whether Kyle had any questions, and he clarified how exactly he and Max returned to Earth, whether they reached the end, to which Alice easily replied that they returned as soon as they died there. She asked if Kyle had returned back like that, and seeing his depressed and upset state, she asked what happened and maybe she said something wrong. The cup in Kyle's hands cracked with the realization that there was no need for him to disappear in Nurem for so long, and he could have just left. Outwardly the guy was smiling, but inside he was raging with a whole storm of negative emotions from the realization that he could just end up back. Mentally, the guy asked the goddess if she sent him there, while hundreds of notice signs were in front of the face of the chained stranger, and Kyle continued to ask why all this. The stranger in chains smiled ominously, while Becky's brother continued to lament that his reward for 140 years in Nurem was simply reaching the maximum level for which he was sent to Earth, and Kyle believed that this was a small reward and he worthy of being awarded more. Angered by such realizations, Kyle was loudly indignant that the reward should have been at least an answer to his question, because he achieved everything with sweat and blood, and the goddess did not even give him answers. Alice, whom Kyle was looking at that moment, looked at the guy in fear and confusion. The guy quickly switched gears and asked why the girl invited him and what she wanted from him. Taken by surprise by such a sudden change in her guest's mood, she looked away, asking if he would like to take a walk. Alice began by calling not only the guild president Max Paxville and his entire Twilight Guild an enemy to Dawn, saying that they already had a tense relationship with them, and frequent conflicts day after day, and now, after the death of the director, Kana will only get worse. Since Kyle was the one who killed Mr. Khan, who was one of the main forces of the Dawn, he must take responsibility. Alice invited Kyle to join Dawn and promised to give him a high position, fame and fortune, and she was sure that he should not refuse such a good offer. Kyle looked away, noting that it was difficult for him to ignore the remark of his sister's boss. At the same time, when the guy looked directly at Alice, he said that despite the circumstances, he still refused her. Turning around, he was about to leave when the girl stopped him by asking why he was refusing, and Kyle had to explain that he was going to be on his own. He took a few steps, turning around to explain his answer. Kyle smiled, clarifying whether she would agree to submit to someone weaker than herself, hinting that his strength was higher than the entire Dawn Guild. Alice looked with disbelief at the smug boy in front of her, assessing his capabilities. It didn't take her long to take her next step, inviting them to test which of them was weak. Kyle thoughtfully asked if Alice knew that 1 year in their world is equal to 10 years in Nurem, and once again said that he had been there for 140 years, putting pressure on the fact that this alone should be enough in their dispute. Alice reasonably noted that age is not proportional to skills and strength, and the guy agreed with her, adding that any person who lived in Nurem for 300 years would not become stronger than Kyle. Alice asked if the guy was sure of this, and activating her power, she created a small purple magic ball. Saying the order to open the barrier, she sent a stream of energy forward. He rushed across the grass towards Kyle, leaving a purple trail behind him. Having drawn the border across the clearing, the magic ball almost reached the guy. Freezing at the end of the clearing, the ball hovered several meters above the ground. A moment later, it flashed with a bright flash because Alice activated her origin skill called Shadow Play. Kyle was still assessing the effect of the spell, which outlined a limited space around them, noticing that some of his feelings had left him, and the space around him had become darker. He also estimated that the radius of action was 50 meters, and in Nurem it would have taken quite a bit of time to create such a shape and effort. Alice, watching with the guy how the ordinary world remained behind the canopy of the spell, explained that this was her origin skill. She said that what was happening could be considered the creation of a new space that imitated the real world, and from the outside it looked like they just disappeared. Alice, stepping forward, again noted that such a skill was called Blood Plum Blossom in Nurem, and she had never failed an assassination mission after using it. Kyle noted to himself with a grin that it was now clear why she could easily kill, and also clarified that their fight would now be comparable to a fight against water with tied hands. The girl, having activated first one and then the other sword with the help of her magic, which enveloped the weapon in bright crimson flashes, said that it was easy to get out of this space, and you just need to kill her. Swinging her blades, Alice looked frightening, adding that the second way to get out of the illusory world was the death of Kyle himself. Kyle took her words too lightly, noting that it was quite funny that she was trying to kill him, and noting that such a skill could be used for more than just locking. The girl did not have enough self-control to stand on ceremony with the guy, and she made a sharp lunge, trying to reach his neck with her blade. Approaching Kyle, Alice agreed with him, without stopping the attack. Only all the attacks and attempts to reach Kyle were unsuccessful, and the guy easily dodged, not allowing himself to be harmed. Alicia took a step back to swing for another strike. She used all her strength and skills to attack the enemy with lightning speed from many sides at once. But this was not a problem for the guy, and he easily repelled all her attacks with his hand. Kyle maintained an indifferent expression on his face, as if the girl's blows, even theoretically, could not cause him any significant harm. Alice took a few steps back in order to gather her strength and approach the enemy with a new attack. She crossed her blades to send a new stream of offensive magic towards Kyle. The guy had to jump away to avoid the blow, noting that he found it interesting that Alice was able to change the direction of the daggers with one hand, and this was a unique form of weapon. Kyle said that only the best assassin in Nirim, whose name was the Dark King, possessed such a technique, who had the special skill Moonlight of the Bloody Path, and Alice was surprised that Kyle recognized her at first sight. Becky's brother smiled, saying that he had already met with a boy who claimed to be her successor, but then Kyle himself was young. Finishing off the girl mentally, he reports that this is why he instantly killed him. Alice froze in shock at this news, not expecting such a denouement. Kyle stood aside, saying that he would give the girl 3 tries to use her skill from Mirim to try to get him, and if she could harm him, then he would agree to join Dawn. The guy invited her to start, and Alice grabbed her dagger more tightly. She began to concentrate mana around herself again, creating a dark red cloud of power, agreeing to start attacking. Kyle, observing not only Alice, but also his own feelings, noted that in Libora's world, which she created, it was as if feelings disappeared, as if there was nothing there, and he even slightly felt like a lost kitten in a huge hostile environment, wondering the question is whether this effect was due to her skill and strength. Meanwhile, smoke swirled in the dark red fog, creating whirlpools within which purple magical flashes were born, clearly posing a threat to Kyle in the future. The guy watched this with a relaxed smile, as if he had not seen anything new in such a technique. Meanwhile, magical clots soared upward, combining into a large whirlwind not only of air, but also of stones. For a few moments they hovered high on Kyle, and then, filled with magical energy, they gained strength and chose the direction to strike. In an instant, they all rushed down in an attack on the guy who jumped to the side, picking up speed and trying to inflict significant damage on him. Kyle extended his hand, quickly summoning his blue magical energy and concentrating it in one place. He fired numerous magical blasts to the sides, smashing all the projectiles flying at him with his blue energy fire. The guy jumped to the side, watching as his mana easily destroyed the hostile red flashes. He raised his hand in a defensive gesture, commenting on his opponent's attack as not bad. His extended arm acted as a shield for Alice's next attack, which Kyle easily calculated, parrying without the slightest loss to himself. Grinning, he informed the girl that she was quite far away, noting that this was her second attempt, causing the girl to be dissatisfied with his reaction. She jumped to the side to maneuver, noting that she knew about it. Having retreated a short distance for the next attack, Alice reported that in the world of Nirim there was the strongest man named Shaolin, and he lived there for 150 years. And since Kyle lived there for about the same amount of time, he was most likely comparable in strength to him. Kyle, who did not attach such pathos and significance to this, and even after Alice's words that most likely he was the strongest person in the world of Nirim, only nodded, disinterestedly agreeing, striking the girl with his indifference. Alice activated the streams of her energy, which immediately raised pillars of stones from the ground nearby, showing her power. The girl, surrounded by dark, bright streams of her energy, spoke out loud about her desire to kill Kyle, wondering what would happen next. Will she become the strongest among Mirim, at this time surrounding Kyle with streams of her powerful dark energy mixed with the stones. The guy, serenely watching what was happening around, grinned, saying that she was most likely right. He continued to watch as Alice lifted many large stones from the ground with the energy flows of her mana, concentrating small flows into one large one, and wondered if she would have enough strength and power so that she could actually kill him. The girl did not listen to him, fully concentrating on using her power, which filled everything around with magical cords, lifting everything up. Alice used all her strength by using an assassin skill called Shadow Daggers. A large pillar of energy and stones formed behind her easily obeyed her when using the skill, and the girl, waving her arms crosswise, directed all the magical daggers towards her opponent in a deadly attack. Kyle deliberately stood in one place, watching as the magical energy entwined with the stones turned into deadly cords heading straight towards him. The guy used just one skill called Sword Soul to create a small beam of energy and protect himself. But its power was so great, the force of the explosion even from a small energy ball was colossal. This energy and strength was enough to instantly dispel all the dark red magical strands designed to kill him. Alice could only wonder at the strength and power of this guy. True, after the flash, which almost blinded her, a huge stone flew towards the girl, which she had not expected. She tried to move to evade, but realized that it was impossible. Something held her back, not allowing her to move even an inch from the site of the attack of the huge stone. Someone's hand swung with force to strike. Kyle stood between Alice and a huge stone with one blow of his fist, crushing the latter into 100 small pieces that flew in the opposite direction from the force of the blow, thereby saving her life. Alice looked fascinated at his hand, which was completely undamaged by the blow, and Kyle himself said with a smile that this was her third attempt, but if she wanted, they could continue. The girl, trembling from the horror of imminent death, answered with a short pause that no, she would not continue, admitting that she had lost. The pink curtain that separated their illusory world from the real one slowly dissipated. Alice promised Kyle that this would not happen again, and asked permission to ask one thing. The girl was slightly wounded, while Kayla didn't have a scratch, and she wanted to know what the guy had done, because for a moment it seemed to her that she was fighting an invincible creature whose capabilities went beyond the boundaries of this world. The guy slowly sank to the ground, crossing his legs to tell her in detail why this happened, starting with the fact that he assumed that this would happen if they fought in that illusory space, and that if an ordinary person were there, he would immediately killed, even if his strength was beyond the bounds. Alice listened in shock to the guy's words, surprised by what he said, because she was able to survive. She tightened her grip on her dagger, asking one simple question to find out just how strong Kyle was. He noted that the girl was very effective at combining her martial arts with skills. This was the answer. In addition, the guy noted that he would like to return to their previous conversation. While Alice was hiding her twin blades in her magic pocket, he said that he would still like to accept her previous proposals for cooperation, but on his own terms, which included financial support for Kyle and his family, as well as providing them with information, for which the guy himself will help the Dawn Guild. The only condition remained that he still did not intend to become a member of the guild, intending to maintain his status as an outsider. Kyle suggested that Alice evaluate this in the form of an alliance, since the guy did not want anyone to command him or help him. The girl, having listened to him thoughtfully, after a pause, replied that she agreed to his conditions, and asked him to promise one thing. Alice asked Kyle Becca that besides the Dawn Guild, he should not support any other guild including Twilight. The guy got up from his seat with a smile, saying that she shouldn't even promise such a thing. Extending his hand to Alice, Kyle introduced himself once again, giving his title as the Immortal Sword Emperor, and saying that he would not betray his word. Mentally he added that in general this was part of his plans, since he was going to fight with the strongest of this world, and out loud he asked the girl to remove all the security and surveillance that she had placed on their family, saying that he tolerated them only because his sister's work, but now he doesn't know what could happen to them, hinting to the girl that she should understand what he is warning about. And Alice did not answer directly, once again reminding that she was not going to harm their family, and Kyle thanked her for understanding this situation, hoping that she would remove the surveillance voluntarily, meanwhile paying attention to the girl's injury. And the next moment the guy tore off part of the sleeve of his outer shirt. Kyle handed this piece of fabric to Alice with a request to forgive him, and she could only look at him blankly, clarifying what he meant. Becky's brother explained that he provoked the girl into her attacks with his talk about 3 attempts, saying that his true goal was to see her skill as one of the strongest people in this world. Therefore, he was embarrassed that she was injured as a result of the battle. Alice answered with a grin that, of course, she thanks him for his kind word, but there was nothing terrible about her wound, since thanks to his strength she was able to muster the determination to kill Kyle, to which the guy embarrassedly noted that the girl herself had been aiming at him from the very beginning vital organs. Meanwhile, Kyle wanted to ask about one more thing, clarifying why in the world of Nurim Alice chose the path of a killer. The girl just grinned, noting that she didn't think that Kyle was thinking about such a thing, because in that first cave, where all those who entered the world of training ended up, she almost went crazy, and she had an insane desire to kill someone, so she stopped on this path. Kyle took note of the girl's choice without responding. He remembered again the system messages popping up asking if he wanted to return to the original world. And if he really wanted this, then he needed to see the end of this world. Kyle answered to himself that he expected that Alice would be able to understand him, because the guy was thinking about such a message the whole time he was there. A business-class car stood at the edge of the forest waiting for its passenger. The driver looked at his watch impatiently, as his boss was late. He heard the sound of the back door opening, and through the rearview mirror he finally saw the one he had been waiting for so long. The driver immediately turned to the passenger, seeing her injury and asking if everything was okay with the deputy head of the guild, clarifying that she even used shadow play, and wondering how strong her opponent was. Alice only noted that even such a powerful technique did not allow her to touch her opponent with a dagger, and he exceeded all her expectations. She spent too much energy, which eventually ran out, which the driver could not believe. Remembering the fight, Alice realized that Kyle had never even attacked her. Moreover, the girl had no idea how he blocked her daggers. Her mood was too depressed after the fight, especially when she admitted complete defeat. The driver said that he thought it would be better if Kyle Benet did not join the Twilight, and asked if the deputy head of the clan had thought about sending the guy to the Sun Festival. Alice, whose shoulder was bandaged with the shirt of her former rival, said that to stop Max Paxville they definitely needed Kyle Benet, and she was ready to do anything for it. The girl remembered the frightening feeling of danger and Max's instruction that wisdom was with him, and she had to follow his will. He argued that the girl was obliged to obey the heavenly warrior, and Alice, either following those precepts or choosing her own path, told the driver that they must do their best to help Kyle Benet.